Well, Mike, I don't think it was really news. I mean, NFL media, as you mentioned, created a bit of a stir by reporting that Bradford was going to bet on himself. I put that in quotes. But to me, that kind of assumes Philadelphia has more than a passing interest in signing him to anything more than a bargain basement extension right now. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. If you look at the guy's history and the fact that he's owed nearly $13 million in 2015, he's played 7 games, we all know, over the past 2 years, two torn ACLs over a 20-month period. The Eagles had to take a wait-and-see approach here. So it's not news. It's not surprising. And you can call it, it's coming from the Bradford camp that it's betting on himself. Well, the bottom line, if he wants to continue to live, at what he has been, the level of $13 million, he's going to have to go out and prove something on the field before he gets anything even remotely close to that.
Were the two sides, though, not talking at some point about an extension? I mean, weren't the Eagles having preliminary talks with Bradford about doing something for him? Yeah,
they had preliminary talks. There's no question about that. But it was all about, as I said, a bargain basement deal. The Eagles certainly would have looked to get something done if he was willing to, sign for $8 million a year or something like that. But you're talking about the last big money bonus baby under the old collective bargaining agreement. He's not used to that. He certainly doesn't want to take that step back and pay. So, sure, if it came down to that and the Eagles were able to get a cost-effective deal, they certainly would have extended him. But things never got serious, and it's understandable why, because they can't get serious until he proves he can stay on the field for 16 games, or at least close to 16 games.
John, he said, if I'm not ready for training camp, then something has terribly gone wrong. Is there any better indication just 2 weeks away from training camp that he's going to be ready to take snaps in at least 11-on-11 drills?
No, I thought the progress was where each side thought it was going to be at the end of minicamp, and I'm not sure he's going to be ready day one of training camp. I certainly, at the best case scenario would be that he would split reps with Mark Sanchez, and I think that's really asking a little much. I think week one has always been the game plan for him to be under center, and they want to go at it to where, it's more important for him to be there than to be ready to take snaps in week one of the preseason. So I think they're going to be very cautious. They know they have a really competent backup in Mark Sanchez, so they're not going to push things, but they certainly want Sam Bradford to be the one there under center week one.
A lot of people think, John, that Bradford will win the job with ease just because he's paid $13 million. Do you have any indication that this will be, Chip got here and had a quote-unquote open competition with Vic and Foles. Vic won that competition. Now he says they will both compete for the starting quarterback job. Do you see any scenario that if Bradford's healthy, that Sanchez is the starter?
No, and you hit the nail on the head. You don't pay backups $13 million a year. And if that were to happen, if Mark Sanchez shows up in training camp, plays lights out, Sam Bradford's not ready for whatever reason, he's not healthy, the more likely scenario, and I say this is not going to happen, but the more likely scenario, if that were to occur, would be that Mark Sanchez would be the starter, Matt Barkley would be the backup, Tim Tebow would be the third stringer, and they just walk away from Sam Bradford because they don't owe him anything. And you're not going to pay a backup quarterback in this league $13 million. So the bottom line is Sam Bradford's going to be the starter. Mark Sanchez is going to be the backup. And the only thing that can derail those plans if he's completely unhealthy and he doesn't get back from the ACL. And if that's the type of situation, that's when you have to look at it and say, let's just cut ties. And I don't see that happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario. What are the ramifications of that trade if Bradford is released?
Well, the ramifications, if he's on as a vested veteran, if he's on the roster week one, his entire salary is guaranteed. So it would have to be made a decision very, very early, and that's not going to happen because the Eagles already know going into training camp that he's not going to be 100% on August 2nd. So they kind of understand that. It's very unlikely. I only threw it out there just to make the point that you're not going to pay a backup $13 million. And he's not going to be the backup. He's going to be the starter. Even if Mark Sanchez does play better in the preseason, even if he looks better, Sam Bradford's going to get every opportunity to seize control of that job because it's just not feasible to move forward with somebody, that makes that kind of money sitting on the bench. You just can't do that in this league.
Now, John, I'm going to catch you off guard a little bit. I talked about this yesterday, but off the top of your head, in the NFC East, if you were to take the best defensive player, who is the best defensive player in the NFC East for you?
Well, that's a good question. Before July 4th, I would have said Jason Pierre-Paul. I think he would have been the most dominant as far as being an edge rusher. Dallas doesn't have a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball. I think their running game helped them. We know Washington's a work in progress. And the Giants, really, it's not a division filled with great defensive players. I think the best player, the best pure defensive player in the division to me right now would be Fletcher Cox. And he doesn't get a lot of press because of what he's asked to do in a 3-4 defense. It's not about making splash plays as much as occupying blockers and letting the linebackers do what they have to do. But the reason, one of the reasons Connor Barwin had such a massive year as far as sack totals goes is because of how dominant Fletcher Cox was. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So I say with JPP down and not healthy, I would point towards Fletcher Cox.
I went the same route. I think him, Hardy's going to miss some time. Lee's been hurt. Kerrigan hurt too. I think Cox might be the guy. It's interesting because we were talking about this yesterday. If you were to pick a corner, would Maxwell be the first corner? I guess him or Amukamara. Safety, probably Jenkins. It seems like the Eagles have the best player at almost every spot. On the first player that you would take almost at every single spot on the defense side of the ball. When you break it down in just the NFC East, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is a weak division defensively. You mentioned Hardy. There's a guy who could, maybe because of his history, obviously he was a dominant player at Carolina, but there's been so many issues. He's been off the field for so long. He's going to be suspended, early on this season. So it's tough to go in that direction. Talent-wise, he could be in that conversation. But as a whole, you're right. The division lacks a lot of defensive talent. Sean Lee, I would have argued would have been the best, pure defensive player on the Cowboys coming in the last season. He goes down with the torn ACL. You don't know what to expect from him. And the Redskins, there's just not a ton of talent on that team. And so the Eagles have been making strides on the defensive side of the ball, and their front seven is very, very good. And if you look at Kiko Alonso, if he can get back to what he was as a rookie in Buffalo, he might be number 2 as the best defensive players in that division.
Yeah, I was bringing him up. I mean, you could almost say the Eagles' 4 linebackers. If I like Kerrigan, but he's coming off surgery as well. But you could say 5 of the Eagles' linebackers might be 5 of the best 6 linebackers in the division, where who would have thought you would ever have said that a couple of years ago with the way the Eagles kind of dismissed that position. So a little fun conversation we had there. Let's look at a couple quick national topics. The Vikings and Adrian Peterson, they restructured the final 3 years of his deal. Are you surprised at how this relationship seems like it's almost changed in about a month?
A little bit, but once the die was cast and Adrian realized he had to go back to Minnesota or wasn't going to be able to play at all, then things kind of shifted toward getting as much guaranteed money as he possibly could. He's past the age of 30, which we all know is a demarcation line in the life of an NFL running back. In a weird way, I think that year off is going to help him as far as his legs and moving forward. But it's really, in essence, it worked out both ways for the Vikings. They didn't offer a ton because, as we just mentioned with Sam Bradford, as a veteran, he was going to be guaranteed a salary after week 1 this year anyway. So that $13 million Adrian Peterson was scheduled to make this year, while it's not technically guaranteed, it really was guaranteed because we all know he was going to play for the Vikings. So really, they only gave him an extra $7 million in guaranteed money, and to get what's going to be a Hall of Fame running back, a lot of people look at the Vikings as a sexy team, and maybe one of those clubs ready to make a leap towards the playoffs. A, because Teddy Bridgewater looks like he's the real deal at quarterback, and B, because Adrian Peterson is back, and having that running game is going to make everything easier for Bridgewater.
John, Tom Brady, Roger Goodell said today there's going to be no timeline when to make this decision. You got training camp opening in like 2 weeks now. What are they waiting for?
Well, I think they're trying to develop a strategy because I think they're trying to understand if the Players Association and Tom Brady are really going to take this to federal court, even if they downtick the suspension a bit, whether it be 2 games or 1 game. Brady claims he's going to court if it's 1 game. So in that case, it really doesn't matter what Roger Goodell does.
Does he have a case? Does he have a case, John? Does he have a case?
Yeah, I think they win this case. I think the NFL wins this case. It's different than the Peterson and Hardy cases because it doesn't involve personal conduct. They didn't punish him under a new policy as they did with players like that. And that's why they lost in those cases. But I compare it to the StarCaps case, if you remember that case, with some of the Saints and some of the Vikings. Kevin Williams, Pat Williams were suspended in that case. They took that to federal court. They got a stay. They were able to play an entire season before getting the suspension knocked down a bit. I think that's the more likely scenario. And in the case of Pat Williams, he retired before he had to serve his suspension, so he never did. So I think that might be the strategy that Brady's looking at.
John McMullen, the NFL editor, sportsnetwork.com, is, of course, the NFL training camps open up in about 2 weeks. A lot of little NFL news and notes here just before training camp, getting ready to go, and we'll keep our eye on the Brady news. And I see there's a report out there that the Giants are hoping to finalize a contract extension for Eli Manning. He's in the final year of that 7-year deal. Are you a little surprised that they are that willing to bring him back before he performs? Because he had a pretty bad last 2 years.
Well, he had a really bad year 2 years ago. He bounced back pretty well. He had one of his best statistical seasons last year. It didn't translate on the field. Obviously, the Giants weren't very good, but that's what 2 Super Bowl rings buy you, and what he's meant to that franchise. And you're right, probably a declining player overall. Probably not as good as people think he is because of his name and the fact that he has been a 2-time Super Bowl quarterback. But in a league that's built on that position, and there's a dearth of them, you really can't walk away from Eli Manning. So the Giants have to work something out, and it makes a lot of sense for them to do so. And teams are smart enough now to make it, pretty cap-friendly, and I think you'll see that with the Giants.
Yeah, they took Nassib, I guess, in the 3rd round a couple of years ago. I guess that's a pretty good indication that they don't think that he's ready to go or the next guy, maybe.
No, and again, if
people thought he was going to be people thought he was going to be maybe the best quarterback in that class or a first-round pick.
Yeah,
I remember
a few did. A few put 2 and 2 together and thought Doug Marrone might take a stab at him. Yeah, but that never really came to fruition. But
he might have been better off.
The Giants have no intention of moving on from Eli. And again, he if you think about the year Odell Beckham Jr. had, it was historic as a rookie receiver. If Victor Cruz is able to come back healthy, that's a big if. They have a lot of weapons outside. The Giants have issues, mainly on the offensive line. They might have the worst safeties in pro football. So there's plenty of issues up the turnpike. But, Eli's not one of them. He had a good year, and they think it's only going to get better his second season under that. They sort of morphed to more of a West Coast offense with Ben McAdoo coming over from Green Bay. And I think as he gets more comfortable, the Giants think, his play will increase. Obviously, what you always worry about with Eli is interceptions, and he was able to cut them down last year.
2 weeks from Saturday will be Eagles training camp, and we'll be over that. We'll talk to John more about it, and, of course, John McMullen here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Always good to talk some football. John, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks, Mike.